first of the year and make even further progress on taking this threat away from the U.S. His remarks come after the North's state-run news agency issued a blistering commentary hours earlier, slamming the U.S. for its, quote, misguided understanding of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The Korean Central News Agency added that nowhere in their joint statement signed in Singapore in June did the two leaders commit to the denuclearization of North Korea. It stressed that denuclearization refers to the Korean Peninsula as a whole, which includes areas where U.S. nuclear weapons are deployed in the South. The commentary also criticized Pompeo personally for asserting that Kim Jong-un committed to the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea, calling it something aghast. Watchers say recent commentaries by the North state-run mouthpieces may indicate a delay in the much-anticipated second summit between Kim and President Trump. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Washington's top envoy on North Korea and his South Korean counterpart meeting in Seoul seem to have found a way for a ceremony to go ahead to break ground on an inter-Korean railway project. So concerns about sanctions in that respect were apparently unfounded. And the U.S. side says it's ready to move ahead on talks with North Korea on preparing for a second summit. Lee Ji-won has more.
Washington Special Representative for North Korea says the U.S. is eager to make progress in its talks with the North, which would likely include preparations for a second summit between their leaders.
We are eager to move to the next stage of discussions with our North Korean partners. We expect in the course of those discussions we will be able to talk about some of the details around President Trump's upcoming summit with Chairman Kim. We do not have a date or a location yet to announce, but we will be working with the DPRK in order to arrive at an agreeable outcome in that regard.
Biegun was speaking at a quick press briefing Friday afternoon after he and his South Korean counterpart Lee Do-hun held the second meeting of their working group. With the North Koreans supposedly silent right now in their negotiations with the U.S., Biegun added that in the working group meeting, he had a chance to present some ideas on how the U.S. would like to move ahead in talks with the North, but he didn't elaborate. These discussions, Biegun said, included the humanitarian assistance the U.S. is willing to consider giving to the North. When he arrived in Seoul on Wednesday, Biegun announced that the U.S. will review its policies on giving the North humanitarian assistance and consider easing the restrictions on Americans traveling to the regime. But when asked about the $8 million worth of humanitarian aid the South Korean government previously allocated for the North, Biegun said that the U.S. is only beginning its review of humanitarian aid and that it will work with the South to coordinate their activities in that regard. Biegun also emphasized that Washington's policy review does not mean an alleviation in the sanctions on North Korea. Specifically, he said humanitarian assistance is not subject to the UN sanctions nor to unilateral sanctions. At the working group meeting, Lee said the two sides found a way for the two Koreas to go ahead with the ceremony they plan to hold next week to break ground on work to connect their railways and roads. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korean officials are heading north of the border on this Friday to inspect roads in North Korea as a part of a joint project to modernize and connect them with the South's. They'll spend 3 days checking a 100-kilometer stretch of road on the eastern coast and next Monday, a 4-kilometer section in the west. Seoul says the inspections will be on-site visits without equipment, and so 4 days is enough. The inspections come ahead of that groundbreaking ceremony the two Koreas are planning to hold next Wednesday for the start of work to reconnect and modernize their transportation. The two sides finished inspecting rail lines in North Korea earlier this month. In other news, South Korea's producer prices fell in November from the previous month. This was mainly due to a drop in global oil prices and agricultural goods getting back to normal after prices hit a peak in the summer. Data released by the Bank of Korea on Friday show producer prices in November edged down 0.7% compared to the previous month. Prices of agricultural goods fell by more than 5%, while coal and petroleum goods plunged by more than 8%. The biggest factor was the price of Dubai crude, Korea's benchmark, which tumbled more than 17% to trade at an average of $65 a barrel. South Korea ranks among the lowest in the OECD in terms of how people perceive their well-being. Among other things, the figures point to Korea's traditionally long working hours, despite the Moon administration's ongoing efforts to change that. It's the areas outside the big cities that are lagging behind. Our Won Jung-hwan explains.
Among South Korea's 17 cities and provinces, the highest score for work-life balance goes to the capital, Seoul. A report published Friday by the Ministry of Employment and Labor shows how residents scored their work-life balance on a scale of 0 to 100. The national average was 37.1, but Seoul was 6 points higher. The runners-up were the cities of Busan, Daejeon, and Ulsan, and the lowest scoring areas were Chungcheongbuk-do and Chungcheongnam-do provinces at 34.8. The report was based on a survey taken for first time in 2017. The ministry explained that the reason for major cities scored higher is that they're home to big companies, and the government has decided to put limits on their working hours, which had often been called inhumanly long. Nearly 6 months ago in July, the government announced a 52-hour limit on weekly work hours for businesses with more than 300 employees. These companies get a 6-month grace period before it's enforced to allow them to prepare. But starting next month, if the rules are not followed, business owners can face up to 2 years in prison or a fine up to around $18,000. With the rules about to change, many big businesses in major cities have been hiring new workers and overhauling their work schedules. But it appears that the imbalance with other regions is likely to continue because many small and medium-sized companies can afford to hire new people and have a harder time adopting flexible working hours for employees who need them. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump is taking criticism from all sides after announcing that he's pulling American troops out of Syria. But he says the decision was no surprise. Meanwhile, Trump's Defense Secretary James Mattis has announced that he's going to resign. Noah Adam has this story.
President Trump took to Twitter on Thursday to defend the move after he faced strong backlash from fellow Republicans and some U.S. allies who questioned his claim that ISIS was defeated. They fear the withdrawal may see the terrorist group re-emerge. They are also concerned the move will cede U.S. influence in the region to rivals Russia and Iran. Trump posted that getting out of Syria was no surprise as he has publicly campaigned on it during his presidency. He added that he had waited long enough and that it was time to, quote, come home and rebuild. Trump then posted another tweet announcing that U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis would be stepping down at the end of next February. In his resignation letter, Mattis indicated he was resigning over differences with the president's policies. The retired Marine general also stressed the importance of U.S. cooperation with allies, many of which have become frayed under Trump. The president's decision to pull troops out of Syria reportedly went against the wishes of his own defense officials. Noah Adam, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
South Korea's nuclear envoy Lee Do-hun met with his U.S. counterpart Stephen Biegun earlier today, and they held their second working group meeting on North Korea. They said they discussed how they will work towards trying to bring North Korea back to the negotiation table as talks between Washington and Pyongyang on the regime's denuclearization have come to a standstill. It was also a chance for the two sides to make sure they were on the same page on other inter-Korean cooperation projects that are currently ongoing. Let's take a listen to some of what the two nuclear envoys had to say after their meeting.
We share the view that this period from now until early next year is a crucial time in terms of establishing denuclearization, a permanent, complete denuclearization, and a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. And we also agreed to continue our joint efforts to quickly hold working-level negotiations between the United States and North Korea. Also, during our working group meeting, we were able to proceed on the issue of the groundbreaking ceremony for the railway connection project as scheduled.
I'm very pleased to say that today we had a chance also to present some of our ideas on how we would like to proceed, in part in the negotiations, in part on our strategy in relation to the DPRK, but also in relation to some of the types of projects, particularly around humanitarian assistance, which we in the United States are willing to consider. The United States has no intention of easing our unilateral or United Nations sanctions. However, within the context of the engagement that we have with the DPRK, we are prepared to explore a number of other things that could build trust between the United States and North Korea. Of course, we're not going to negotiate that.
Now, to look at the further on these outcomes of the meeting, we have joining us today Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
So the first point I want to pick up there from that soundbite we just heard was Lee Do-hun confirming that during the working group meeting with Stephen Biegun, they agreed on the go-ahead for the Inter-Korean Rail and Road Reconnection Project, the groundbreaking ceremony anyway. Earlier this year, Seoul and Washington had been at odds over this event and this issue, and then the working group was formed to try and try and smooth out some of the differences that they had. Can we say at least that this working group has been successful in bridging those differences?
Yes, I think so. The U.S. position originally was that this groundbreaking ceremony takes a lot of assets and money from South Korea. A lot of budget should be allotted to this ceremony, which is a very huge amount of money. So this is definitely the violation of the United sanctions on North Korea. That was the position of the United States. And also during the September 19th summit meeting between North and South Korea, the Pyongyang declaration clearly stipulated at the time that in order for only this groundbreaking ceremony is something that would be done by the end of this year. So two summits did not clearly say about what would happen after the ceremony. I mean, after ceremony, they will just have to go into constructing and reconnecting all the rails and roads, which takes, a lot of, monetary assets, from South Korea to North Korea, which is clearly the violation of United sanctions. So I think they have agreed upon it. But still, as they have agreed in the summit meeting, I don't think the construction of the railroads and rail and roads reconnection thing between two Koreas, I don't think that would be happen because that is still the targets of the violation of United sanctions.
Sure. I mean, this groundbreaking ceremony is set to take place next Wednesday. But actually, other than the actual ceremony itself, there's not much that the South Korea and North Korea can do without violating sanctions ahead.
No, as I have said, I think the U.S. only, allowed this ceremony, groundbreaking ceremony this time. Even the groundbreaking ceremony was the violation of the United sanctions, but this time they allowed it. But afterwards, the construction of the rails and roads and reconnecting those rails and roads in South Korea and North Korea, I don't think that will be exempt from the United Nations sanction this time.
Let's pick up on what Biegun said as well. So he said sanctions on North Korea will remain, but he also hinted that there might be some other things that they could do. He said, if I quote, "We are prepared to explore a number of other things that could build trust between the US and North Korea." What do you think he means by that?
He didn't really say clearly. I mean, he said that he would go back to the States and talk about what measures would be there. But here in Korea, at the working meeting, he talked about the humanitarian assistance to North Korea. For example, sending us some significant medicine like Tamiflu to North Korea. Of course, the excavation of, American soldiers' remains in North Korea. All that kind of things, I think, would be very good measures for confidence building between North Korea and the United States. Before, the U.S. position about the humanitarian assistance was that, for example, in case of medicine provision, the U.S. was not clear whether that medicine provided will be, alighted into the right position and right people in North Korea. There was suspicion that North Korea uses that kind of medicine for the humanitarian assistance to go out and sell somewhere else for another, monetary, source. So U.S. did not allow the humanitarian assistance, but I think this time the U.S. seriously wants to have a summit meeting, and in order for that, there should be some talks, high-level talks but talks are not going on very well. So very important incentives the U.S. is giving to North Korea, which is one of the implications that if North Korea does something, initial steps, U.S. also will be willing to lift some initial sanctions. That's kind of implications of this kind of humanitarian assistance. But we'll see how it goes. But it's very meaningful.
Economic sanctions, they've kept saying will stay in place, but he's also stressed very much that humanitarian aid is not actually part of the international sanctions. So he's saying they'll make it easier to give humanitarian aid to North Korea. Is this some sort of carrot that Biden is offering to North Korea? And I think the important question is it enough for North Korea to take it, to come back to denuclearization talks?
For now, it's not enough, because U.S. and North Korean positions towards each other is very much contrary to each other. I mean, North Korea is saying that North Korea has done enough of, denuclearization process, destroying a lot of test sites and, launch sites. So it's now turn of the United States to do something, for example, lifting sanctions on North Korea. But the U.S. says that there has not been any serious move to denuclearize North Korea. So North Korea has to do something, some serious initial steps to denuclearize North Korea, so that U.S. would lift some initial sanctions for North Korea. So there is a very contrasting attitude towards each other. So for now, I don't think humanitarian aid would be enough incentive to move North Korea for denuclearization. But what we need to think about is the New Year speech of Kim Jong-un, January 1st. Under these kinds of incentives given by the United States, I think there will be some positive messages contained in the New Year speech of Kim Jong-un. I think that would give some momentum for high-level talks between the United States and North Korea. We'll see what that speech is about, but the incentive is, I think, aiming pretty much at the contents of the New Year's speech by Kim Jong-un, I think.
If I just go back to Biden, actually, so when Biden arrived in Seoul, he mentioned that the American citizen that was freed by North Korea after he was detained a couple of months ago, and he said it went smoothly. But I want to go back to that press briefing earlier today, because what he said about that release was also quite interesting. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The discretion, the sensitivity, and the professionalism shown by the DPRK in handling the expulsion of that American is one factor we will be considering as we review the rules that we're applying on the visiting of American humanitarian aid workers. So that has given us some greater confidence, and we look to build on that in the process of the other ways that we'll be working with the DPRK in the new year.
So that's actually very glowing words that Biden has given to North Korea's handling of this situation. It's quite, I don't know, it seems quite almost acting almost about this situation, whether we should be surprised that, an American gets released by North Korea. I mean, what do you think Biden is trying to do with these kind of comments?
Well, Americans, traveling in North Korea, the normal expectation is they travel in North Korea and come back to the United States timely and safely. They should not be captured in North Korea. The captured American have had a lot of disasters before. But what Biden said today is that I think the U.S. is lowering its expectations towards North Korea for resuming talks with North Korea. I mean, Americans, captured in North Korea and expelled by North Korea, that is not normal situation. But even the expelled American situation, I think the Biden is thinking that that's something professionalism and sensitivity and discretion, which I think is not a expected words from high-level government official of the United States. So this kind of talks, kind of looking at something not very good as normal and good, I think this is very good, serious, expectations and deliver of the very good messages, charm offensive towards North Korea, so that North Korea would come out and talk with the United States.
But they still haven't, and there still seems to be all very small steps that we are taking towards having these denuclearization talks. But yet, the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, he's reiterated in a recent interview in the U.S. that he believes President Trump will have a meeting with Kim Jong-un early next year, implying possibly January or February. But there have been no talks between North Korea and the U.S. So can we still realistically expect this next summit to happen?
I think Trump definitely wants the summit. He thinks that, he has initiated a talk with Kim Jong-un, something new, something unprecedented, something totally different from the previous government's attitude towards North Korea. So he wants to make his move successful. He doesn't want to ruin his policies. He just wants to take this step towards something totally different policies towards North Korea, which would look stupid and failed by American people and the public and the elites. So I think President Trump desperately wants a summit meeting sometime early next year, but he can't just have a summit. There should be some talks and some outcome about the denuclearization of North Korea. Something very concerning for a lot of U.S. officials working at the State Department is that even though there are some differences in their policies towards each other between U.S. and North Korea, they can come and talk and narrow down the differences. But the real problem is there is no talk at all. There's some talk stalemated. So that's the biggest problem. And in order for summit meeting, they should come and talk and exchange their views and have some outcomes that can be pronounced at the summit meeting. So I think that's something that they need. But I think President Trump is very much desperate for summit. So I think we'll see how it goes. It all depends upon the North Korea's attitude and responses and what Kim Jong-un says at the New Year's speech.
There's one big final development that I want to talk about before you go as well. The U.S. Defense Secretary, James Mattis, has resigned quite surprisingly. It seems that it has something to do with the situation with Trump pulling out of troops out of Syria. But Mattis has also been a very key figure in U.S.-North Korea relations in the last few months. And if you read some stories about Trump, Mattis was a very key figure in reining in Trump on his perhaps belligerent tendencies. I mean, what do you make of Mattis' resignation, especially in light of the situation with North Korea? And do you have any concerns?
Yeah, you're right. The Secretary Mattis is, I think, the only person left in the cabinet that can soothe down, President Trump's temper, I think. I would say temper, but maybe some belligerent policies, as you have mentioned. He had some, conflict with President Trump for many issues. For example, Jerusalem issues, Syria issues, and also alliance issues, NATO issues. Secretary Mattis is pretty much thinking based upon very traditional way of thinking in security policies, but and also based upon that he wants to make President Trump go into the right direction. But if he resigns, I don't think there will be someone left who can give a very direct advice to President Trump. And also next year, the domestic political situation with Democrats being the majority in the Congress, there will be a lot of pressures by Democrats on President Trump. And I don't know if Kim Jong-un stays put and does not really be serious about denuclearizing itself, I'm not sure what President Trump's policy would be. I mean, he will be really crazy and angry about North Korea. His domestic political situations might take a very different policies and steps on North Korea. That's something I'm worrying about. And also with with Secretary Mattis going out of his position, I'm not sure who can take the role of Secretary Mattis on President Trump.
Well, let's hope Mike Pompeo can help keep Trump keep his cool. Anyway, we're out of time. So thank you for coming in today and, as always, sharing us your insights.
Thank you very much.
That concludes our show for this week, but our regular newscast throughout the weekend will keep you updated with all the latest from Korea and around the world. Hope you can join us next time. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Goodbye.